Does Jordan Peterson get Nietzsche wrong? I'm sure if you've researched Jordan Peterson at all or a fan of Jordan Peterson, you may have come across this criticism at one point or another that he misinterprets Nietzsche. And I'm going to try and make this video to clear this up real quick, as simple as I can. So, yes or no? Yes, he does get Nietzsche wrong. Explicitly or literally he does. I think the bigger issue at play is that Peterson actually just disagrees with Nietzsche. I think they are both interested in the same problem, which is the problem of nihilism after the death of God, right? So both thinkers share the same problem, but they differ on their proposed solution to said problem quite distinctly. So I'm making this video to explicate that distinction and to emphasize, I think, a very important point is that Jordan Peterson is not an ally to Nietzsche's philosophy. They disagree. They're both trying to do the same thing, which is solve nihilism. However, for Jordan Peterson, the problem of nihilism is the loss of belief in an established, well-functioning value system. But for Nietzsche, nihilism is an inevitable result of the passing of time, of history, right? So Christianity has gone through its life cycle. It's not something we can plausibly return to. It's something we have to let go of, right? We're in a different world now. Christianity no longer makes sense. And in order for it to make sense, I mean, just watch Jordan Peterson's videos. He goes through the most obscure Jungian loops you could ever make. I mean, he gets Jung wrong, too. I mean, he thinks archetypes are literal epistemological concepts that exist in the world. They're true, in a sense, instead of just images cast over things. So it's just so much easier to just let Christianity die than it is to try and resurrect this dead corpse, right? And that's what Nietzsche's trying to emphasize. God is dead, and we have to accept it. We have to just get over it. We have to conceive of humanity as not an end right before God, but a means, a rope. So we have to invest in the future, try and create new values. Jordan Peterson is, after all, closer to a Dostoevskian or a Kierkegaardian slash Jungian than he is to a Nietzschean slash Jungian. The difference being that Dostoevsky postulated the famous line in Brothers Karamazov, "If there is no God, everything is permitted." And Nietzsche also takes this up as a serious issue. He thinks it's a genuine problem. Jordan Peterson thinks it's a genuine problem. I don't. I don't think it is. The reason why is that if you think without God everything is permitted, I encourage you to just go and commit a crime and see what happens. Like, there's going to be significant negative things that happen to you if you commit a crime, right? Even if you don't commit a crime and you, let's say, treat other people like shit on a day-to-day basis, right? Like, it's not like you can just do that and get away with it. People are going to respond to that, and you're going to have like severely negative consequences through your life. So, strictly speaking, no, not everything is permitted, and whether God exists or not has nothing to do with it. It's just a fact. Not everything is permitted. And the reason why things aren't permitted is because human beings are ethical creatures. We have ethical desires. We regulate each other's behavior. We have governments. We have rules, right? We have norms and traditions that people have to adhere to. And if they don't, bad things are going to happen. There's going to be negative consequences to that. So this is why I think like Heideggerian existentialism is so important, because it acknowledges the existential limits that already impose themselves on our behavior and on our existence, regardless of whether or not there is like an absolute authority or God or rational system behind uh, those existential structures. They already exist. Ethics already exists. It doesn't. It's not a question of whether ethics can or cannot exist if there is or is not a God. It's a question of how do we reconcile the ethics that already exists with the need for a higher authority. So, from a certain meaning-based perspective, fellas like Dostoevsky and Jordan Peterson are actually quite greedy. They're very greedy. It's not that they've lost sight of meaning, it's that they refuse to accept the meaning that already exists in their lives. And that's the existential problem. That's the problem of nihilism, really distilled, right? And that's why Nietzsche is so important, because Nietzsche understands this, right? Nietzsche was the first to really ground the shift towards materialism and naturalism. I guess is a better term than materialism when it applies to Nietzsche. He's a naturalist. He wants us to embrace the earth. He wants us to love the earth, the things that actually exist. He wants us to be able to find meaning in the things that actually exist. And so if you need someone to appeal to the Bible in order to get you to do something as simple as cleaning your room, it seems very, very odd. It's like you're taking the longest way possible to a destination, right? You could have cleaned your room the whole time. You never needed uh, the Bible to tell you to do that, right? You don't need Jordan Peterson to tell you to do that. And more importantly, uh, the fact that you have found a sense of responsibility is not a validation of the source of where you found it, right? It's just sort of an accident. Um, you don't need God in order to have a sense of responsibility. And I would go even farther, speaking personally, and argue that it's more difficult to have a sense of responsibility if you believe in God, because God is really the one who has the responsibility. God is a deflection mechanism. He allows you to deflect responsibility in your life, right? Most people do that. They use it to justify evil in the world. They use it to justify uh, corrupt systems. So the true responsibility is accepting the death of God and inheriting the earth, as it will. Having responsibility not just over oneself, but over one's species being, and also the earth itself, which we have to sustain, right? We have so much power over the earth. Um, Taking responsibility for that power and making sure we critique severely problematic systems that are in place that are polluting and destroying the earth is very important. And so it should be obvious, as someone who cares about the environment, it bothers me to no end when Jordan Peterson says things like, you ought to accept the wisdom of the Father, uh, and then points towards modern day capitalism as the wise father who is currently spewing smoke and carbon monoxide nonstop into the atmosphere. There isn't wisdom to be found. Okay, it was wise, you know, 2,000 years ago. It was wise 1,000 years ago. It was probably wise about 500 years ago as well. But the Father's wisdom is now antiquated, and it needs updating. It needs a system update, and um, the critical thought required to do that isn't going to be found in a Jordan Peterson lecture. It's just not. What you see instead are his apologetics, his appeal to dogma, his appeal to authority, and a general ignorance with respect to actual problems that exist in the world. Now, that's not to say that things like depression or the difficulty being a young man in the modern age are not real problems. It's just that they are problems whose solution doesn't necessarily have to be steeped in 2,000-year-old Christian dogma. It's really superfluous. It's completely unnecessary. You can solve these problems. You can grow up. You can find responsibility for your life uh, without a God. You can do it just by thinking, just by observing and trying to be a good person and caring about things more, right? Like um, having the courage to care about things that actually exist, having the courage to admit when there are serious problems that exist in the world. Um, it's the simple things like that. If you're interested in what I have to say or my personal philosophy, um, I take issue with Christianity because um, Christians make it seem like everything is going to be okay, and therefore you don't have to feel what Heidegger would call the call of conscience. And um, Christianity and sort of like self-help books and self-help guides, what they're very good at is turning off the call to conscience. They're good at turning off the desire or the call to have a greater impact on the world and to fight to make things better. And what they try and emphasize is that things are already okay. When you do that, you're sort of validating all the problematic aspects of reality. Um, for Christians, the earth is not their home. The body is not their home. Instead, these are sort of just like temporary burdens that we have to deal with while our soul is going towards its final destination, heaven, where there will be no earth, there will be no mosquitoes, there will be no trees or whatever. There's no organic matter, it's just pure spirits or whatever. You no longer have to take care of the earth, right? The destination is beyond the earth. And so a Christian can never feel as if they have to truly take care of this natural world because they don't see themselves as truly a part of it. They see themselves as outside of it, right? So at the very foundation of Christian ontology, and I'm including in this the dualism of individuals like Rene Descartes, and in the idealism of later figures like Fichte and Schelling, there is this all-pervasive need for humanity to be seen as separate from nature or liberated from nature. And whether it's an appeal to the Christian soul or it's an appeal to the pure ability of our brain to use rational faculties, it's always an appeal to the special nature of the human condition as something inherently anti-natural or anatural. It's outside of nature. We are not the same thing as trees and animals. We are fundamentally different. Um, but the difference is really just one of degree and not one of type. And this is what is just fundamentally wrong about Christian religion. Or, I mean, I don't know what to call it really, but whatever it is that sees human beings as having a soul and being separate from the material world. The problem is that they do not see the earth as a home. They see it as a temporary sort of passageway, right? Humanity is the true end. The earth is disease. It has original sin. What's pure is the heart, the soul. Um, and so there's always this contempt towards the earth, contempt towards the body that's existed all throughout Christianity. And all throughout the history of the West. Um, and we see that in the way we treat the environment. And we see this in the escapism of the Christian ideology. They do not envision human beings at any point in our history living in harmony with nature. They've given up, just as you ought to give up on trying to fight for social justice, for larger issues at hand, and instead only focus on yourself and your own happiness. This is, of course, the easiest way to live life. And if it were true that you had a soul and could go to heaven, it would probably be an acceptable path. But for people who just cannot believe in a heaven, it's ridiculous. And more so than that, it's irresponsible. Because if there isn't a heaven to go to, then it turns out that our earth is indeed our home, and we have been treating it like shit for 2,000 years. So, to Jordan Peterson, the grand defender of the wisdom of the West, I stand in strong disagreement. Sure, there are some aspects of reality that the West has picked up on and understood. Mass production, the ability to distribute wealth, modern economics. There's great potential here. But there's also a lot that's going severely wrong, and Peterson's rhetoric is one of silencing. It is one of turning against anyone who is willing to propose serious critiques of Western society. Nihilism as a concept, as a problem, is so easy to abuse. It's very easy to think that it has authority over you, but the more that you really think about the idea of there being no grounds for meaning, the more you realize that it's kind of bullshit. Human beings have meaning all around us at all times. Even the very philosophical pursuit of trying to solve nihilism is itself a pursuit that people care about. So it's inherently paradoxical. It really is. Um, but it's that paradox, that hypocritical declaration of the void as a real thing, that leads towards the need for God, right? It's only when you devalue real life cares, right? Like the need to eat, the need to have shelter, the desire to, through compassion, help your fellow man and women and animal and species, the desire to do literally anything in life. If you have desire, if you have joy, if you have sorrow, then you've already solved the problem of nihilism.